folks, it's Rogowy here, and we are off to another tutorial. And today we are looking at HDR photography. And this is something that has been around for a few years now. What is HDR photography? I'm sure we've all heard of it. We've noticed that most of our smartphones have an HDR option. What is it and how does it work and how can we create HDR photos? Well, let's just take a quick look at Google here and let me do a search for HDR images so you have an idea, HDR photos, so that we have an idea of what they look like. Here we go. So this is a perfect example of an HDR image. And you notice right away that it's very dramatic. We've got a lot of color. It's very saturated. It's very dramatic. Dynamic. And that's what HDR stands for. It's high dynamic range images. And you can see in each of these examples that you've got incredible detail in the sky. You've also got incredible detail in all the shadowy areas. Overall, the picture almost looks too perfect, but magnificent at the same time. You get these beautiful, beautiful photos. So why is HDR, what is HDR doing? And I'll try to explain in a very simple to understand explanation. Like I said, HDR stands for High Dynamic Range Images. It used to be HDRI. They dropped the I, they just called High Dynamic Range. HDR images, when you go and take photos, and hopefully most of you have taken a lot of photos if you're watching this video and following along, you'll notice that our camera has trouble in certain areas. If I was to go out on a really bright day or a day with an overcast sky, or I'm on the beach and I want to take photos of my kids playing on the beach, I'm gonna have trouble, and my camera's gonna have trouble getting everything to be exposed properly. That's because our eyes are able to see approximately 20 stops of color. And I'm not really going to explain what stops of color means, but just know that our eyes can see a pretty broad spectrum of color. Our cameras, and even the best ones out there right now, I think are up to about 14 stops of color. So our technology, our camera technology, is not up to the point where our eyes are. So our eyes see more color and more dynamic color, and therefore we have to decide when we take a photo what the most important part of the photo is going to be. In this photo that I'm showing here as an example, obviously the more important part was the room. And in doing so, excuse me, the room is nicely in focus and exposed properly, but look what happened to the bright window where the sun was coming through in the sky in the back. And this is very common. The sky has blown out. This is called blowout or overexposure, where we have no information. All right, and this is the problem. We have told it to focus on the darker areas, and so because it only sees a limited range, we've lost the detail in the brighter areas. All right, the opposite is true if I took that same shot and I went with a faster shutter speed to get the bright areas. That's a little extreme. Let's go back a little bit here. Okay, so here's a good example. Now my camera is focused on the sky. I'm exposing for the bright sky, but look what happens. Everything else goes to silhouette. Everything else goes very, very dark because now I put more emphasis on the bright area and less on the darker area. And because of that smaller spectrum that the camera sees, I've sacrificed part of my photo to get that. So why is HDR so fantastic? Why is it able to get everything in perfect focus and really, really excellent exposure? Well, HDR works off of multiple exposures. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a 4 exposure photo. And the way that you do this is you set your camera to bracket your photos and you set it to continuous shot. And what a bracketed photo is basically telling the camera to take one bright one, one medium one dark one, so that you're covering the whole range that our eyes see, but that our cameras don't. All right, so I'm not going to explain because it's different for Nikon and Canon. They're completely different. But what you're trying to do is get a series of photos at different brightnesses, different exposure levels. And again, very important to keep your camera on a tripod because if it moves, it's going to screw it up. I just want to say very quickly before we get started that I take no credit for the photos being used. These were ones that I had found. I should have used my own, but I really liked these examples that I found here. So anyways, launch Photoshop. You're not going to actually open up any of these yet. We're going to look at 2 techniques on making HDR images, an advanced technique and the traditional technique. There's also software, and most people will use software instead. One company called Photomatics has amazing software for HDRs, and I really strongly recommend if you're serious about HDRs that you look into purchasing their software. Okay, so when we're in Photoshop, we're going to go to File, we're going to go Automate, and we're going to go Merge to HDR Pro. And this is going to come up. And we're going to click Browse, and we're going to go to our desktop, and we're going to find the folder. In yours, it'll be Wednesday Tutorial. We're going to go to HDR Traditional, and we're going to hold Shift. We're going to select all 4, so they all become highlighted. These can be RAWs, they can be JPEGs, can be any accepted format, and it should read. I'm going to hit Open. You'll see that they come in order. We're going to hit OK. And we're going to see that it's going to process a little bit, and we're going to get another window that pops up. And what I want to do is I want to explain what we're seeing in that window. All right, almost there. Okay, so the initial processing is done, and as you can see, we now see the sky, we now see the details in the shadows. It's put them together nicely. However, we have a lot of options on the side, and we can make it look more dramatic if we want or less dramatic, and I'm going to explain each one. What I strongly recommend you do is you go through the presets, and the presets are preset formats or settings that will let you see your photo in different settings. So I'm going to start with City Twilight, and I don't like that. And I'm going to go to Flat, and I don't like that. So what I'm doing is I'm just going through and I'm finding one that I think is a good starting point. So I'm going through, and you can see some are really crazy, but I'm going to go through until I find one that I think brings out a lot of the details. And let's see. I like that one. It's a good one. Scott 5 is the name of it. So let's look at the options that we have available to us. First of all, we have Edge Glow. I'm not going to talk about this just yet. We'll talk about it in the second part of the tutorial. Edge Glow is how much do you want the edges to glow where they're combining the photos, and you can change the radius, you can change the amount of strength, so you can have more edge glow, or you can have less. And you can find a kind of a nice balance of where you think it looks pretty natural, but yeah, not overly done. Again, it depends on your photo. Next is tone and detail. Oh, and sorry, there's also this edge smoothness. Okay, it'll try to smooth the edges. As you can see the difference. Before it's very contrasty. When we turn that on, it's much smoother. So again, that choice is yours there too. Tone and detail, all right? Gamma is going to, well, increase the overall brightness of the photo itself. So, you know, as I bring that up, I'm changing the actual balance between the light and dark areas of the photo. So you can see when I really bring up the room, the sky gets very dark. So I'm basically changing the light and dark areas. So I like to keep that pretty normal. Exposure. Same idea here as if I was going for a longer exposure on my camera. If I'm going for a really high key photo, now it's taking more information from my bright shot. And opposite, if I go down low, now I'm going for a quicker exposure and a darker shot. So here we can find one setting that we think looks good. And we don't want to lose information. The whole reason we're doing HDR is so we don't lose any detail in the bright areas. So we want to make sure we maintain that. Detail. How much detail is preserved? If I pull this right down, it's going to go very dreamy looking, very soft. You know, in the middle, it's going to look pretty normal. If I crank it, it's going to try to bring out, it's almost like a sharpening slider is what it does. It brings out all the little details. Now down in advanced here, you got some really nice options to play around with. Shadow, which tells the software how much information to pull from the darkest images, from the shadowy areas. You can see that that's affecting the shadows under the couch, mainly the darkest areas. Highlights, opposite. You know, you want to increase the bright areas more or less, depending on how much detail you want in those areas. Vibrance, how vibrant the overall colors are. All right, maybe you like a less vibrant image, sort of like that. I mean, it's up to you. And saturation, how saturated those colors are. All right, so if I crank it, it's going to look really way too bright. And if I bring it down, it's going to look more muted. So I'm going to find kind of a nice balance there. And then when I'm happy with it, I'm going to hit OK. So Photoshop's going to do its thing. And there we go. What it's done is taken those 4 images and put them together into one. And now we can see that we've got detail in the sky, we've got detail in the shadows. So we have combined it into one complete, I don't want to say perfect exposure, but a really good exposure, an exposure that now has proper, no bloat in any area. Let's look at another way of doing this, and a way that I think is much better. It's more advanced, but much more improved. I'm going to close this. And make sure you save it. I'm going to just call it, put it to desk. I'm going to call it HDR1 and save. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go same process, File, Automate, and we're going to go Merge to HDR Pro. We're going to browse, and this time we're going to use the folder called HDR 32-bit Advanced. And you know, I have all of the, well, I'll show you what the shots look like first before I do this. We got 9 shots of Yosemite. You can see it just slowly getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And so it's 9 exposures of Yosemite Park. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to combine the other exposures. We're going to go File, exact same process as before. We're going to go Automate, Merge to HDR Pro. This might take a little bit. We're going to go to Browse. We're only going to pick, we're in HDR 32-bit Advanced. We're going to pick every second exposure, so every second picture. Some photographers go with more bracketed shots just so that they can increase their spectrum a little more. For the sake of the tutorial, we only need to pick every second one. We're going to hit Open, we're going to hit OK. This might take a little bit. So we're going to wait for it to load. And it's going to put it together the same as it did last time. Let Photoshop do its thing. And depending on the size of your images, sometimes it takes longer or shorter or whatever, depending on how large the sample images are. Keep in mind that these were raw images. For speed's sake, I could have probably made them JPEGs, but there we go. Now we're in the raw window. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change up our settings a little bit. We're going to try to keep all the information in one image. I'll show you what I mean. We're going to change our mode here to 32-bit. And what's going to happen is we're going to lose all of that information that we had, regarding, how much detail and the tone and the gamma and all that's gone. But we are left with this slider that we can slide that shows us how much detail is in the image, all right, in the overall image. And we can see that there's a ton of color information there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hit OK. And it's going to load. What we're doing is we're creating one 32-bit file. So basically this one file has as much information as we can cram into it. And if you look, when we open it, it looks like crap. It really does. It doesn't look HDR-ish at all. It looks like, looks really bad. But at the top here of our tab, we can see that the settings for our image is RGB 32. So we know it's a 32-bit image, which means that even though it looks bad, all that information is still contained within this file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to save it as a TIFF file. Save as a TIFF. Let's call this one HDR2. And let's save it to the desktop. And we're going to make sure that these are the options that we have set. 32-bit, no compression, interleaved, IBM or Mac, doesn't matter. We're going to hit OK. And it's going to save. And now what we can do is actually close this. And you don't even have to save it because we just saved as a TIFF. That might seem like a huge waste of time. Why did we do that? Well, I'm going to show you something cool that we can do outside of Photoshop to bring that file back into Photoshop. We're going to put Photoshop down for a sec. We're not going to quit it. We're just going to put it down. We're going to go to our hard drive to find a program that you may not use very often. So go into your applications, and we're going to look for Adobe Bridge. There it is. And I'm going to open Adobe Bridge folder, and I'm going to open Adobe Bridge. Now, if you haven't used Adobe Bridge before, Adobe Bridge is an excellent program for quickly checking your photos, deciding which ones your best ones are, rating your photos, deleting ones that turned out blurry or bad. But it also has a hidden trick inside here as well. We're going to go to the computer, we're going to go to the desktop. In this case, whoops, I can just go to my desktop here, hopefully. It's going to take a second to load. But once it does, we should see HDR2, the one that we're looking for, on the desktop. Ooh, that's taking a long time to load. It might be because I haven't used it for a while. There it is, HDR2.TIFF. And now when we click this, we don't want to double click it because it's going to open up. You can see that the preview of our window has the picture that we were working on. And what we're going to do, this is the trick that I think is really awesome that is built into Bridge, is that we can open up any photo with Adobe RAW. And this is really powerful when you're doing HDRs because, in my opinion, the RAW sliders and the RAW settings give us much more control. Just one thing I wanted to mention here is in the metadata, you can see right here that the bit depth is 32, which means that we got all that information. So here's the way you do it. You click, but you don't double click. You just click the file you want to open with RAW, and on the Mac here, you press Command R. And it's going to load. And look at that. Just like magic, that file loads up in Photoshop RAW or Camera Raw. And now we have all the options that we're familiar with, and we can edit this file using the 32-bit detail and information that's in it. I'm going to just crop it really quickly because I want to use just this part of the photo down here to kind of get rid of that tree that was up there. I'm going to crop it down. I'm going to just tweak my exposure a bit, and I want to show you that as I do this, it's a 32-bit image, which means that it is keeping all of the information from all those, well, in our case, we used 6 exposures, all within this one file. All right, now I just blew out my sky, but look at, I got all that information, all that detail is there. I just have to move my slider and bring it right back. Why am I showing you this way of doing an HDR? Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of people doing HDRs out there. And some people are doing them really well, and some people are doing them not so well. The problem I see with most HDRs is they look like HDRs. You can tell by the way they're processed that they are HDR images. There's usually a glow around the objects in the picture. They're way, way, way too overdone. The detail is too strong. Personally, I think it's better when the photo still looks natural. But in this case, we're drawing from those, different exposures to fix those trouble areas. So as you can see in this case, what I like is that we can go and, do all of our nice editing within the raw window that we're used to. And we can tweak it as much as we want. And when we're ready, let me just brighten it up a little bit because it's pretty dark still. When we're ready, we can hit Open Image. And we are still looking at a raw image. Oh, that's interesting. That is really interesting. That was not supposed to happen. Open with Camera Raw. Okay, hang on. I'm just gonna say done for now. That is really weird. It's trying to open it with Photoshop CC, which really doesn't matter, I guess, in this case, because I got both on this computer. It's the same result anyways. Now when we open up our image and we look at it, we're going to see that that photo looks a lot more natural than most other processed raw files. So that's the advanced way of doing it. That's, like I said, that's the 32-bit way of processing an image. And I do feel that that gives you a better result at the end. As you can see, no blowout. Okay, no super underexposed areas because, like I said, it's drawing from all that information. You get a much more natural result and still getting the advantages of doing an HDR image. Anyways, save that. Make sure you hand it in. Whoops. And hopefully this was helpful for you. I'd like to see what kind of HDRs you guys come up with.